welcome to another episode of Read It with Whiskey. My name is Laura Juntunen, and I am your host. I am a self-published author as well as an avid reader, and everything sci-fi and fantasy just lights me up, and especially the guest that we have on today. She lights me up. She makes me so happy. I've been following her for a while. That author is Kristen Martin. So Kristen Martin is the international Amazon bestselling indie author of the YA science fiction trilogy, The Alpha Drive, the YA dark fantasy series, Shadow Crown, and personal development books, Be Your Own #Goals, and Soul Flow. She also just recently published a book titled Beyond the Stars and Shadows. So Kristen has definitely a bunch of books on our radar. However, she's also a writing coach and creative entrepreneur. She is an avid YouTuber with hundreds of videos offering writing advice and inspiration for aspiring authors everywhere. And today we are going to be talking primarily about Shadow Crown, her young adult dark fantasy series. So this is what it's all about. For most people, the act of killing is intangible, unfathomable, but not for 17-year-old Arden Illyri. Having been involved in crew assassination attempts as a mere child, killing is a natural disposition for her. Growing up without parents in a castle ruled by an iron-fisted king is the furthest thing from a fairy tale, as is being forced into the crew, the king's group of hand-selected assassins. But with each passing year, she comes to enjoy the act of killing more and more. Kill or be killed, she chooses the former. A decade ago, King Darius Tymund banished the Kaldari, those who practice Elusier or Old Magic, from Trendaleth Kingdom, ensuring that no Kaldari will ever step foot in his kingdom again. But Arden discovers otherwise after a dual-assigned mission goes horribly awry. Even more startling, she discovers that she may have more in common with the Kaldari than she's been led to believe. Arden wants to trust that King Tymund's intentions are pure, but as their paths collide in unexpected ways, the quicker she realizes the consequences and dangers of his reign. But Arden is also hiding something that threatens her very existence, and she'll have to face her inner darkness and conquer it before it destroys her and the kingdom she's come to call her home. The Shadow Crown series is incredible. At the time of recording this interview, I had only read one book, but I have since read the other two that are already out and published. So I'll tell you a little bit about that after the interview. But let's get into this. Welcome to Read It with Whiskey, the interview podcast featuring science fiction and fantasy authors. My name is Laura Juntunen, your host and the author of the Shockwave series. I am also a book club moderator, speaker, and avid reader, truly invested in every author's story. Within this podcast, I bring to you, the reader, all the behind-the-scenes secrets to how these guest indie authors bring their books into the world. If you are a sci-fi fantasy reader, then you need to hear from these authors. Let's learn about the person behind the page. Sit back, sip some whiskey, and lean in to these self-published authors. It is time for a little Laura J. Live update, and you guys, this is a huge month because it is NaNoWriMo. So National Novel Writing Month is basically a feat where you try and write 50,000 words in 30 days, and it is grueling. It is very, very difficult, but it is basically the only way that I know how to write anymore. If I have strict deadlines and certain amounts of words that I have to write every single day, I thrive and I can get a lot of projects done. So I am diving into NaNoWriMo, and I am a little over a week in already, and I am writing Static Equilibrium, which is book 3 of the Shockwave series. So book 1 came out in March 2021, book 2 came out at the end of September 2021, and Static Equilibrium, I just started writing it, and we will be seeing this book in publication in the late spring of 2022. So this is a really big deal for me. I love NaNoWriMo because, it's just such a fun experience having the ability to track your writing, track all your progress, and there's a huge community as well who are involved on social media and on the NaNoWriMo website too. So that is basically my update for this episode. As I talked about in the last few episodes, I am recording these early. So I am actually not recording this as I am going through NaNoWriMo. I have recorded this a little bit beforehand. So hopefully at this point, about a week into NaNoWriMo, I am hoping that I already have a couple thousand words, if not over 10,000 words at this point. So we shall see. I will definitely give you guys an update once we get back to those live Laura J. Live updates in the near future. So let's dive into this episode with Kristen. Kristen, and welcome to the Read It with Whiskey podcast. How are you doing today?
I am great. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I am so excited to have you here. I'm totally fangirling because I've been watching your YouTube channel and podcasts and Instagram for a couple years, and you are one of the reasons why I started writing and actually pursuing it. So when we connected, I was like, this is just dream come true. I'm so happy to have you here. So I really appreciate your time, and I'm really excited for my listeners to hear all about you and your books. So let's just dive in. Why did you become a writer? Tell us.
Oh, goodness. I have been writing since I was 6 years old. It's always been a passion of mine. So, when I was like 6 or 7 years old, I would take printer paper, fold it in half. I'd write my stories in there. Or at the time, if I didn't know how to write, my mom would actually take the pencil and write my stories for me. So I'd narrate them and she would write them down, and then I'd illustrate them with colored pencil. I always had a notebook with me, and I was just so fascinated by the world and everything in it and the people in it, and just came up with stories about everything. So I was that kid. You could not get me to shut up when I was younger. And that's really how it started. Just, I've always had a love for writing. I can't remember a time when I didn't love writing.
I love that. And I feel like a lot of the people I interview, it's very similar. It's an internal passion that we couldn't stop it if we tried.
Right? Yeah.
It's going to come out. And I just love that you remember that when you were 6 years old. That's so cute. So now you are a full-time author, but you are also so many different things. You are an entrepreneur of multiple streams of awesomeness. So tell everybody, what do you do on an average day? What kind of projects are you working on?
That's such a great question because every day is different. Mm-hmm. So it's so hard to put a label around what it is I do. I just like to use the term creative entrepreneur, but I feel like that hardly covers the majority of it. So, where to begin? So yes, I write books. I have a YouTube channel where I started off on my YouTube channel giving writing advice, and then kind of moved into coaching. So teaching writers how to essentially become authors and market their books and, become a successful author without having to go through a traditional publisher. And then kind of went down the road of a creative business, like coaching program, mentorship, which was called That Smart Hustle, which is still something I don't know. I wouldn't say I promote it regularly anymore because I've kind of gone into a much more mystical, different line of work now, which is a lot more about intuition and intuitive energy readings. So I've definitely kind of gone into more of a spiritual, metaphysical line of business. And funny enough, my books are starting to follow that path that I'm on now. So I just kind of go, it really is like intuitive living. Like I just kind of go with what I'm feeling called to do in the moment, which I know a lot of business coaches and whatnot would be like, no, like have a niche. Don't go outside of your niche. That just has never really worked for me. I've always dabbled in a lot of things.
I am very similar. I have so many different avenues that I want to take, and I have to slow myself down, be like, okay, calm down. You have time for everything. It's okay. But I love that you mentioned your spiritual shift, because when I originally found you, it was like right at the cusp of the beginning of you really expressing who you really are and taking charge of that persona of who you really are and letting go of what other people think. And I just commend you for that, because the transformation that I've seen you go through just as an outside observer has been really inspiring. So I just want to say, thank you for being you and for taking those tough steps and being like, no, I'm going to be myself, and I'm okay with that. It's just really
thank you so much for it. It's so nice to hear that, because in the beginning of my journey, I was working a full-time job in a corporate setting. And so I knew that there might be a chance, and they did, that my colleagues and managers would somehow stumble across my YouTube channel. And that is something that did happen. And so I felt like I had to maintain this corporate persona, this really put together girl. I felt like I couldn't joke, I couldn't swear, I couldn't be myself, I couldn't be goofy or silly, because then I would be taken. I worked in a male dominated industry, by the way. It was oil and gas, chemicals in Texas, when you're a female in that industry, you can't just be you. Like you have to like conform to a certain narrative. So I love hearing you say that, because yeah, after I left that job, I really went on that whole career and decided to just be a full-time author and creative entrepreneur. I really just started to step into who I actually was, but that took a lot of unlearning and unconditioning and unshedding of all of that BS that they teach you, like you have to be this way, you have to be uber professional. And I'm just like, no, that's just not who I am. Not me.
Yes. So you totally transitioned into writing, and that was a main focus for you for a while there, is getting a bunch of books out pretty quickly. What was it that made you decide, okay, I'm going to do self-publishing instead of doing the traditional route?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I actually wanted to go the traditional route at first. And I did query my first novel, The Alpha Drive, to a number of different agents, and actually had a few who wrote me back and wanted to read through some of the chapters. And so we did that. And one of them, we got pretty far in the whole agent querying process. And she had a bunch of ideas for that book in particular and that series. And it got to a point where I didn't like her ideas. And I was like, that is not the direction that I want this to go. And so I had to kind of make a decision right then and there. Not that she had like offered me anything at all, like representation. It was nothing like that, but we were getting pretty far down the path. Mm-hmm. And so I had to ask myself, is this something am I willing to give up how I want this story to be, for it to be like represented by an agent and potentially go to like a bigger publisher? And I came to the conclusion that the answer was no. So that's how I kind of started down the whole self-publishing journey. I was on YouTube looking for videos and just researching anything that I could on self-publishing. And this was back in like 2014, 2015 timeframe. So self-publishing was still very much taboo and kind of like looked down upon. So it has been so cool over the past 6 years to see it just boom, and people taking this on and making something of themselves and writing books and publishing them under their own publishing company and being successful. Like it makes my heart so happy.
It is amazing, the transformation of the industry as a whole. Yeah. And I don't know if it maybe was me not being aware of the self-publishing world back before I ever decided I wanted to actually pursue writing. Mm-hmm. I didn't know anything about what was traditional or what was self-published, but even once I dove in, it has transformed so much. And it's so cool to see. And it's fun because there's going to be so much more coming and more pivots that are going to be created in the industry. And it's just going to bring more people to finally write their books, which is amazing. And so tell me a little bit about, like, you did all of this research for yourself, and then you kind of pivoted and you were like, I learned everything. So now I'm going to give it to people so they don't have to do all that hard work and research. So what was that like, finally deciding, okay, I'm going to help other authors?
So I'm just naturally someone who likes to share things, especially knowledge. So kind of moving into astrology real quickly, my moon sign is in Sagittarius. So I am like a seeker of knowledge, like, yes, higher truth and meaning and all of that, but I love to learn. I'm like a student for life. But then there's this part of me that it just felt like, okay, I have all this knowledge and I know how to do this. And there has to be someone out there who also wants to do this, who also is starting to research this and maybe feels overwhelmed. And I have that kind of personality where I can really compartmentalize certain, I don't know, like processes and kind of like make my own, not compartmentalize, that's not the right word, but just like streamline processes, take a bunch of different pieces, put them together and streamline them in a way where the process is easy to follow and it makes sense. So it just felt natural to me to just be like, okay, I'm just going to share. Yeah, I'm just going to share the knowledge that I have, and hopefully someone out there will use it and find it helpful.
Well, people have, I've watched your videos and I love, okay, so how do you feel going back and looking at like the first videos you ever made? Because you're so different.
Cringe. They are so cringe, but I've kept them up because I'm like, it's a part of the journey. And I also think too, people can really see that transformation and see where I came from and where I am now. And so it's kind of like, if that girl can do it, anybody can do this.
Oh, I love that. And but it's true. I think having your older videos up there really helped me
to feel confident in my own self, being like, okay, I'm just like this person who doesn't know what's going on. But she was too at one point. And I think it made it possible to relate more to you, even though I haven't met you until today. So, but I think those videos helped in translating all the information that you were telling, because it was more, I could just relate to you better, I guess. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think you've really touched on something there, because I think that's part of the problem with waiting to launch something or waiting to share your knowledge and your resources and to help people, because oftentimes I see people will kind of want to wait to share what they know until they feel like they're the expert, or they have all this experience or proof or whatever, a certificate, I don't know, to back it up. And I personally think that makes them unrelatable, because I'm just like, wait, but like, where's your journey? Like, how did you start out? How did you get to where you are now? And so I think like, I really do attribute like a lot of those older videos to kind of where I'm at now and my success as an author, because just like you said, people can refer back to this, this girl that was just sitting there with her terrible camera quality and just you were being so awkward.
You were trying to be so professional and not mess up, and it was just it was so cute. And I can say that now.
This girl is trying so hard. This girl is trying so hard. I will give her a minute of my time. Like, I look at that girl and I'm like, oh, you go, girl. Like, you you do you know.
It's just so cool looking back. Too funny. Okay, so you have quite a few books out right now, and you've self-published all of them. Let's go through and just like really quick overview of what you've done. Let's start with the Alpha Drive series. What is that series about?
Yeah, so the Alpha Drive trilogy is a young adult science fiction dystopian world that has to do with an alternate reality. You have a really awesome female protagonist, and she kind of meets someone on the other side, like who exists in this alternate reality. So it's kind of like the two of them, it's a guy, obviously. So like the two of them are working together to try to figure out what's the truth, what's real, like whose universe, whose reality is the real one, if there even is one. So very reminiscent of like Hunger Games, definitely Divergent, and also the Matrix movies as well. So those really, all of those books and that movie series really got the wheels turning for that whole trilogy. After that, did I write Be Your Own #goals? Did I go in a completely different? Yeah, I think I did.
I think you did. Yeah. But yeah, then you have the two nonfiction. So go ahead, tell us about those ones.
Yes. So we have Be Your Own #goals, which was definitely more of my corporate professional life phase, was when that book was written. So that's one thing I want to say that's really cool about releasing a book every year, is it's kind of like a time capsule of not only my life for nonfiction, but also just like in my like headspace where I was at when I wrote those fiction stories too. So Be Your Own #goals is more about like essentially stop comparing yourself to everyone around you and just be who you are. That's why the title of the book is Be Your Own #goals. Because that was like such a common phrase that was going around on social media and Instagram, which was, oh, #goals, like your #goals. So I wrote a book around it. And then the next nonfiction book is Soul Flow, which is definitely more of a spiritual, somewhat metaphysical, I would say, but more so a spiritual nonfiction book that really just kind of goes into things on more of a soul level. That's a book that'll really make you question your existence and how, like, why you are the way you are, why you think the way you think, and why you behave the way that you do. So that one's really good if you're just wanting to kind of dig into your identity and what you're doing here.
That one's more in line with what you're currently doing on your podcast though, too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
And
actually that, the Soul Flow audiobook is still available for free on my podcast. So when the pandemic started, I had recorded the audiobook and then there were some issues with Audible because I was trying to get it going, and they were like, the sound quality is not right. And I'm like, it's fine. But we couldn't really make that work. So I'm still working on that. But for now, yeah, that entire Soul Flow audiobook is available for free to listen on my podcast. So
very cool. We're going to dive into the Shadow Crown series, and then we'll get back to your newest book later on at the end. Shadow Crown of the series, the first book, is what I read to prepare for this interview. And I mean, first of all, this series is beautiful. Your covers are incredible. I think that was the first thing that really drew me to them, was just how pretty they were. And then I just liked the whole idea of what it's about. So tell our listeners, if they're not familiar, what is this series about? Give us the synopsis.
Yeah, so Shadow Crown is a young adult dark fantasy series. There are currently 3 books out, but it will be a 6-book series. And it's essentially about this assassin named Arden O'Leary, who discovers that she is what is called a Lucier in their world, which means she has magical abilities. But of course, the king has outlawed magic in the whole entire kingdom. So essentially what the whole series, because it's so hard to like wrap up
right, yeah,
what the whole thing is about when there are 6 books, but essentially she leaves the kingdom, she flees the kingdom, and she discovers that there are more like her. So more Lucier, more people with magical abilities called the Caldari. And so she teams up with them, but there's also this darker force that's kind of lurking in the lands. And she's also struggling with her own inner battles of darkness. So throughout the series, you start to question, like, is she actually the villain? Like, what is going on here? But that's like pretty much the main question. So you're wondering if she's going to overcome this inner darkness or if she's going to succumb to it, and what that's going to mean for the Caldari and the whole kingdom and everyone that she's come to love and care for. So
I love it. I love it. And I will say, I read it really fast because I think it's broken up in a way where you can binge read it, which I like.
Good.
I think it's because there's different points of view. And
yes,
like if stories are in one point of view, sometimes they get bored of that character's outlook of life or the thing that they're going through. And I'm like, give me something different. You have 5 different points of view in this book. I think that helped me go through it so quickly because I'm like, okay, now I know what Arden is feeling, but what is Ryden feeling? What is Darius feeling? What's happening in this world? And I think that's why I was able to read it so quickly. So tell me, what made you decide that you wanted to have 5 points of view in this story? Because you could have had 1 if you really wanted to, but no, you said, okay, I'm going to have 5.
Yeah, I think it's because I knew that I wanted this to be a 6-book series. I just started to question if I could have 6 books worth of just one person's perspective the whole time, even if it was the main character, which kudos to the authors and the writers who can do that, because I am beyond impressed by that. But also just, I think it was a challenge for me too, as a writer, to have to go into each of these characters' heads and view things from their perspective and how they'd be feeling. So I feel like it adds dimension to the book. And like you said, I think it does make it where you flip through the chapters really quickly. Like it's like a little bit of a binge read because you're constantly getting new perspectives, and yet they're all tying in together to the main overarching plot line. At first, I did it where I would write Arden and then go straight into Ryden's point of view, and then Darius, and then Surlia, and then Braxton. And I would just like keep going like that. And then as I got into writing the 3rd book, I was like, because there's so many details and so many subplots going on, I was like, okay, we're going to have to try a different process. And so for the 3rd book, I started writing where I would write all of Arden's first and then all of Ryden's chapters. But obviously I would have to go back and make sure that the timing between all of these different characters and their perspectives all lined up. But when it comes to editing it, I do go through it chronologically, obviously, just to make sure that I do multiple passes of edits to make sure that I'll read all of Arden's chapters, and then all the rest of the characters' chapters. And then I'll do a different round where I'll read the whole thing chronologically. So it definitely takes more time than a book with just one point of view, but it's a challenge for me. So
but I think that's smart that you go through and you kind of read it in different sections and then read it straight through timeline, because then you're going to find plot holes that you didn't even realize were there when you were initially doing your first draft. I mean, there's always plot holes when you're doing your first draft.
In the 4th book, I'm editing. It's Crescent Fire. I'm editing it right now. I'm only halfway through the editing process, and I have found so many plot holes. I was like, dang. I was like, all right, we're gonna have to patch these up.
I love that. It's so fun. So which of the 5 points of view was your most fun to write?
Oh gosh. I would have to say, so Arden's always really fun to write just because I do like writing in first person, because hers is the only point of view that is first person. All the other ones are third person. But Surlia, the Queen of Sardoria, man, I just love writing for her because she is tough as nails. We'll just put it that way. I love her so much.
I'm excited to see, because like I said, I've only read the first one, because I knew if I read more in the series before we did this interview, I would spoil stuff, like without a doubt. But I'm excited to see where Cerelia, I'm excited to see where the Queen story goes, to see what happens as everything unfolds. So I'm excited for that. One of the bigger themes within this story is the kind of the struggle that Arden goes through, good versus evil, dark versus light. So tell us, was that difficult to write? Did you put any of your own self into her as you were writing?
Oh, yes. So as I've kind of gone on it's funny how it all just ties together, but as I've gone on my spiritual journey, I've really like delved into something that's called shadow work, which is really just accepting all of the unhealed parts of you as a person and recognizing that any single human being on this planet has the capability to perform any action, to feel any emotion, any feeling, and to act on that if they so choose, but there's free will. And so it's really that acceptance of the light and quote unquote dark aspects of yourself, I think, that leads you to feeling whole within yourself and not getting triggered or upset when someone else points something out or I don't know, tries to call you out on something, because you understand, like, yeah, I have the capability to be that thing, to do that thing, to behave in whatever name this person is calling me, but like, I choose not to. And I don't know, in that moment, it's kind of like you take your power back. So in that whole journey for me personally, I feel like I've taken a lot of my own shadows and things that were unhealed and unprocessed and really transmuted that into like my writing, where I kind of made her, Arden, go through some of those same struggles, just in a different setting, of course, because it's a fantasy world. So I had to keep to the whole theme and whatnot. Yeah, it's such a huge part of my life now, and like the work that I do with intuitive energy readings and really helping people uncover their shadows or those things that they're kind of blind to, the things that are holding them back.
I feel like when you were writing this, I mean, I don't know where you were in your personal spiritual journey at that point, but I feel like you having her go through this struggle was mirroring what you were doing in your own life. And it was kind of like a vulnerability was being brought through her because it was a struggle in your own life. And it was kind of like a therapeutic process. That's how I viewed it when I read it, because I had been watching all your YouTube videos and I could totally be speculating on that. But that's kind of how I read the book and related it back to you.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
Because, when I published that book, I think it was the year 2017, if I'm not mistaken, my life was falling apart. That was kind of like the beginning of my spiritual awakening process, or kind of like that spiritual journey, just really questioning everything. My life was falling apart. And so the only place I really felt safe was in that Shadow Crown world, and especially writing for Arden in that first book. Yeah. So you picked up on that.
That's really cool though, that you were able to do that. And I think in my own books, there's parts of me that go into different characters, depending on even like how I'm feeling that day as I'm writing that scene. And so as I'm reading it, and as I read my own work and read other people's work, I really think about that, how much of our own personal emotions as authors seeps into our work without us even realizing it. It could be completely subconscious, but it happens. So yeah, I'm excited to see the rest of this series, get through the 3 that I already have. And then once those other 3 come out, oh girl, I'm going to be all over them. I'm hooked and I'm only on number 1. So I'm going to fly through. Okay. So you also just published a book, Beyond the Stars and Shadows, and that one just came out this year. So tell us, when did it release? What is it about? What inspired this new book?
Oh, yes. So Beyond the Stars and Shadows released in May of 2021. And it was actually supposed to release this fall, but I couldn't keep it to myself any longer. So I released it earlier in the year. But that book was actually born during the pandemic. So really out of isolation. And that's the first time I obviously wrote a book feeling like that, and also having like the world kind of feel like they didn't really know even what the next day or the next hour was going to bring, you know? That one really just allowed me to fully, it sounds like I use my books as escapism, which I am like totally okay saying that because that's a shadow that I've worked through. But yeah, it was an escape for me to dive into this other world that I had created, which was very much like our own without the pandemic. Yeah, with characters that I really resonated with. That book just gets like, it's very dark in the first chapter. And I was kind of worried. I was like, I think people are going to hate this protagonist. Like, they are going to hate this main character. And I was like, no, because there was so much of me in her. And I was like, if you do that, you're basically saying that like people hate you and that you hate yourself because everything's a mirror, right? So it was a process again. I'm constantly doing self-reflection, self-evaluation, if you couldn't tell. But so writing Ilara's story was just so much fun because that book is just one point of view. It is a standalone. It's metaphysical, so it's under the metaphysical visionary genre. It's really hard to sum up what that book is about, but essentially she's a teacher's assistant at a university in Colorado, and her professor goes missing, as do a number of other professors throughout the book. And so she ends up meeting this other teacher's assistant. His name is Zero Savala, and they start to, I don't know, get to know each other, but also she discovers that he's not from here, that he is from elsewhere. And so it gets really, really metaphysical, really, really fast. We'll just put it that way. So it is very much like a mind-bending, kind of far-reaching book, but I tried to keep it grounded here as much as possible with the types of scenarios that the characters go through so that it wasn't too far-reaching, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Oh, I'm excited to read that one too now. Oh goodness, my TBR pile is just growing. It's growing. It's fine. But okay, so this is a standalone, like you mentioned, and one point of view. So everything you were doing, you were like, let's just do the opposite.
Basically, yeah. But it's a standalone. So I was like, I can do it. I can do it for one book. It's actually my first standalone in terms of fiction. And so I loved that. And I'm like, actually, I really like the series thing has been a challenge and I've loved it, but I really like writing standalones. So
yeah. And that was going to be my question, is which do you prefer? Do you think you'll do more standalones now that you've experienced it and you enjoyed it? Or do you think you'll ever go back to writing more series? Obviously, you're still working on one.
Yeah, I think at this point, I'll probably write more standalones, which I never thought that I would say that because I love reading book series. I'm such like a book series girl. But I think Colleen Hoover, I have to like give her mad props. She really introduced me to this world of like just releasing a bunch of standalone novels. And I know a lot of other authors do this, but I just didn't realize like how many she had released and all in different genres. And I was like, we can do that? Of course we can. So,
we self-publish. We can do anything we want to.
Exactly.
You have the final 3 of the Shadow Crown that you're working on. Is there anything else that you're working on currently?
Yes. So for NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month this year, I am working on a more of like an occult fiction, like a paranormal book. And as of right now, I believe that one's going to be a standalone. But I've been like doing my whole mind mapping process and really mapping things out, started writing for some of the characters just to see how they fit. You know, it's like trying on like a new outfit. I'm like, okay, does this character fit or no? Because I have a couple other projects that have just been on the back burner for years. But I don't know, this new idea, this more paranormal occult storyline is really speaking to me. So that's the one I'm going to work on this fall.
I love it. That's exciting. And I feel like that one is very in tune to where you are in your current life setting as well.
Yes.
You just use your current energy and you're like, this is what I write. I love it.
This is what we're doing now.
A lot of people do that and I love it. I'm totally happy with it. It wouldn't be Read It with Whiskey without talking a little bit about whiskey. So Kristen, what is your favorite whiskey to drink?
I would have to say Woodford Reserve, and shout out to my mom's husband because he's the one who turned me on to it. So
awesome.
It's delicious.
Good choice.
If you haven't tried it, I recommend it.
Yes, for sure. So tell our listeners, where can they find you? Where can they find all of your books, all of your courses, all of your YouTube? Tell us everything.
Everything. Well, where to start? So the best place to start is probably on my website at KristenMartinBooks.com. If you like YouTube videos, then you can go onto YouTube and just type in author Kristen Martin and my channel will pop up. And then on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, I'm also at author Kristen Martin. And I think that is all of them.
Awesome. And then when in doubt, I think all of your stuff links to everything else.
So it does, yes. So if you click on something, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Like I said, total fangirling. I've been following you for so long and I'm excited to see what's coming next because I feel like everything you bring out is just like a new little surprise. And it's always exciting to see people grow. So thank you so much for being on Read It with Whiskey. I had so much fun talking with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura. I had a great time.
Kristen Martin is incredible. I love her, and you can tell just through the conversation that we had that she is such a genuine person, and she really has helped me a lot in my author career. So I was so fortunate to have her on the show. And like I mentioned in last week's episode with Kaya Carrington Russell, Kristen Martin was also on that list of authors that I wanted to see come to the podcast. So we still have a few more coming up in the future episodes, so definitely keep an eye out. But like I said in the little intro there, I did end up reading all 3 of the currently published books in the Shadow Crown series after the fact that we had already interviewed. And like I said in the interview that you just listened to, I didn't want to read book 2 or 3 until we had actually had the interview because I didn't want to accidentally give spoilers. And that goes the same for every other author that I have interviewed. If their book is in a series, I do not read book 2 until I interview them, just to avoid those spoilers. So no spoilers will be said right now, but I will say that Renegade Crew and Jaded Spring were top notch and they follow along perfectly with Shadow Crown. I'm really excited to see the next 3 books in the series because when I originally interviewed Kristen, when we set up the interview, I did not realize there was going to be another 3 books in this series. I thought it was a trilogy and that was going to be it. But you guys, we still have 3 more books and they are going to be coming out very soon. So definitely keep an eye out. Maybe in the far future, we will be able to have Kristen back to talk about some of the other books that we briefly mentioned within the interview as well. But yes, she was amazing. I hope you guys really enjoyed the interview. And next week, we will be talking to Patrick Johns, the author of Juntunen. This is book 1 in the Hoarding series. It is dystopian, science, futuristic type book, and it is so much fun. And I was so fortunate to be able to have the opportunity to interview Patrick because we interviewed and 2 or 3 days later, he went and moved back to Spain. So we'll talk about his career and why he moves back and forth from the US to Spain every year. And that'll all be in their interview. So again, that's Patrick Johns, and he's the author of Junkland. So we will talk to him next time. Tune in with us then. You've been listening to an episode of Read It with Whiskey. I am your host, Laura Juntunen, and I just wanted to personally hop in and say thank you so much for listening. Your support of the podcast means so much to me, and I would really appreciate it if you could go onto your favorite podcast platform and rate and review the show. By rating the show, you're going to help more people find the podcast so then we can grow. Once you review the show, share it on your social media. Share your favorite episode with your friends, and come back next time to hear more from self-published authors. I'll talk to you soon.